When Mao died, the Beijing prisons director committed suicide, so I knew I'd be set free.
After Mao's death, a lot of Chinese people hoped the system of terror would disappear along with its founder.
When Mao died, I thought that something very important was about to happen.
China has changed a lot since then. But the Laogai are still there, and their repression machine is more powerful than ever.
Do you have any idea what torture is? It's beyond anything you can imagine.
I thought to myself, what happened to my father is now happening to me. Today, 80 years later, I'm an enemy of the state as well.
The Laogai system is a cornerstone of Xi Jinping's power. He uses it on a scale unseen since the great campaigns of Mao.
First, they put a hood over your head. Then they chain your hands and feet.
While almost 1.5 billion people are being constantly watched, the Laogai ensure Xi Jinping and the Communist Party total control over the country.
China seems more and more like a big prison.
Mao's death opened a troubled, confused period filled with both hope and uncertainty. When Deng Xiaoping came to power, things changed. China's new leaders had all been victims of persecution, and none of them wanted to return to Maoist terror. But Mao's name was sacred. Even after his death, he watched over his country from his mausoleum on Tiananmen Square. The new leaders had to decide what to do with the Laogai they inherited. Deng Xiaoping chose to right past wrongs and ordered the first rehabilitations.
This is the court order sent by the Zhujiang County People's Court in Henan Province. It's my father's act of rehabilitation. It says, your father was sentenced to death and immediately executed. But the initial verdict was wrong, so it must be corrected. It's thus cancelled, and your father's reputation is restored.
The gates of the Laogai opened, and in less than 2 years, millions of victims of Mao's terror were set free.
It was in 1978. Between the moment I was labelled a rightist and the moment I returned to my position as a teacher, 20 years had gone by. For all those years, I had done work that peasants wouldn't do. When I became a teacher at the town school again, I was 45.
Deng Xiaoping's government adopted a penal code, the first in the history of the People's Republic. Until then, the party was the country's only judge. The new legislation was to ensure that the Mao-era abuses would never happen again. The hope of freedom gradually rippled through Chinese society. People began to speak out. In Beijing's Zaidan Street, a wall where people used to post small ads was suddenly covered in hundreds of dazibaos.
It was one of the few places where ordinary people dared to express their opinions. The wall was about 100 meters long, and when petitioners posted their dazibaos, there were always hundreds of viewers.
Freedom of speech was what we needed most. That was the #1 priority.
For the very first time, victims of the Laogai spoke out about their suffering and denounced abuses of power and corruption. Deng Xiaoping encouraged any criticism that would help him get rid of his conservative rivals and pave the way to his 4 modernizations program. It would affect every sphere of life, except one: politics.
It was a chance not to be missed. As I wanted to share my opinion, I wrote an article on the 5th modernization that evening and posted it on the democracy wall.
Wei Jingsheng had just posted the first truly dissident text in communist China. The People's Republic needed a 5th modernization, that is, democracy.
It was a small poster written in ink, which was then copied out much bigger. An amazing number of people flocked to read it. At the back, people were shouting, "Can you please read it out loud? We can't see a thing."
Wei Jingsheng's dazibao said what many Chinese thought. Laborers, farmers, intellectuals and artists from all over China marched in Beijing. They wrote on their banners demanding the party uphold human rights and democracy, thus almost directly questioning the leadership of the party. For those in power, it was one step too far.
People shouted, "The police have arrested someone." The policemen were stressed and sweating. I screamed, "Post it on the democracy wall. Say I've been arrested."
There were 3 or 4 plainclothes policemen. It's easy to see who they were in the photos. I was locked up for a week in a detention center, and then they presented me with an arrest warrant, counter-revolutionary crime.
A few months later, the party staged the first trial of an opposition leader. To make an example, they chose one of the protest's most emblematic figures, Wei Jingsheng. The trial, in public, showed it respected the rules. The hearings were filmed by state television. But behind the official images, the reality of Deng's justice was very different.
Judge Luo was a recently freed rightist. He asked me, "In your opinion, what sentence do you deserve?" I said, "I ought to be acquitted." He said, "Don't kid me. You'll definitely be given a sentence." I said, 3 to 5 years imprisonment. He said, "That's what I think." But his superiors wanted a much longer sentence. When he came back in, his face was serious. He read out the sentence and left. It was a heavy sentence, but not the death penalty.
It was a very heavy sentence, 15 years. We had transcribed the whole trial. So we said, let's make it public. We copied it onto a dazibao and posted it on the democracy wall.
Those were the last days of the democracy wall. The police received the order to clean it up. The dazibaos were replaced by advertising billboards, the first in the history of the People's Republic. Liu Qing was arrested and found out what the new rule of law really was.
I told them we only printed the minutes of the trial. What laws have we broken? Why are you arresting our comrades? Why are you confiscating our brochures? Your action has no legal base. You must set us free.
Like many of his comrades, Liu Qing was sent to prison number 1 in Beijing.
La prison numéro 1 de Pékin au petit matin. Les 1900 détenus sont déjà prêts depuis longtemps à se laisser filmer pour la première fois au monde par une équipe de télévision.
The regime took pride in showing foreign reporters a prison that had been reorganized according to Deng Xiaoping's great reform. Prisoners had the right to visits and a day off every week. The rules of the Laogai changed. Under Mao, Laogai detention was unlimited in time. Now it couldn't last more than 3 years, 4 for serious cases. Though the aim of turning detainees into good soldiers of the regime hadn't changed.
La prison, c'est un instrument de la dictature du prolétariat, un lieu où l'on transforme idéologiquement les criminels.
But they didn't let the cameras show that to re-educate detainees, they still used Mao's old Laogai methods.
As I refused to confess to my crime, they took me into an office and beat me up. This is the plan of the ground floor, which is K-shaped. This is the corridor. They made us sit on a little stool whose seat was made of a few lengths of rope. It really hurt your butt. We were so underfed that the rope ground into your bones. We had to sit up straight on that stool for 14 to 15 hours a day. And if we didn't, they'd beat us.
A new form of punishment was invented. The most influential dissidents were sent to solitary confinement.
It's miserable being locked up on your own. At first, you're happy not to be disturbed, but you end up feeling terrible because there's nobody to talk to. Humans are social animals and need to communicate. When nobody talks to you for ages, you start going crazy. Work would have given me the chance to talk to other people, but they were forbidden from talking to me.
Apart from important political prisoners, everybody worked. Contrary to what was claimed under Mao, the system was very expensive for the state. Deng Xiaoping's reform aimed to make the Laogai profitable. Every prison, every camp had to become self-sufficient. To achieve this, the administration raised production quotas, increased working hours, and cancelled rest days. Outside, nobody knew what went on behind bars. Deng Xiaoping's reforms seemed to loosen control over society. The Chinese were less scared and public morality relaxed. Young people got rid of their Mao collars and listened to Western music. But there was another consequence of the new economic policy, a spectacular rise in petty crime. The party's conservative wing blamed Deng's reforms for causing this degradation of public order. Deng needed to silence his critics.
邓小平同志在讲话中还提出了加强思想战线工作的问题。全会决定，中央于今冬明春召开会议，专门讨论这个问题，并作出相应的决定。
Order had to be restored. In keeping with Maoist tradition, Deng launched a repression campaign. Only this time, it wasn't to arrest a few thousand opponents. It was mass repression. Youngsters accused of spreading spiritual pollution were rounded up in the cities. A campaign against misdemeanors targeted the unemployed, vagrants, petty criminals, and swindlers. The party intended to impress people's minds. Death sentences were staged according to Maoist rituals. Condemned prisoners were paraded in the streets before the execution. Pronounced sentences with the names and photos of the condemned covered city walls. Between October 1st, 1983 and April 1984, at least 10,000 people were executed. The Laogai filled up again with petty criminals. Between 450,000 and 1 million of them were arrested during this period. Deng Xiaoping did it. His repression campaign was successful. And yet, not all the young people were brought into line.
The 1980s in China are hard to forget. Back then, students were very respected.
Students were the only young people to escape repression. They were the country's great hope, those who would build the new China.
The moment you entered a university, you felt the atmosphere of freedom. Everywhere there were associations and conferences going on. So naturally, I thought, I'm going to organize some events as well.
In December 1986, students staged the first pro-democracy protest marches in Shanghai and Beijing. They felt even more powerful as the party's general secretary, Yaobang, refused to repress them. This was too much for Deng Xiaoping. He forced Yaobang to resign. On April 15th, 1989, Yaobang died of a heart attack. Students flocked to Tiananmen Square to pay respect to their favorite leader. And just like 13 years earlier, following the death of Zhao Enlai, this final tribute turned into a protest. The students decided to occupy Tiananmen Square until the government gave in to their demands.
We thought our demands for free speech, free assembly were quite reasonable. We thought they might be able to yield to students' reasonable demand.
各位观众，晚上好。现在报告晚间新闻。
What happened was so big that even Chinese state television couldn't ignore it.
今天，首都高校部分学生绝食请愿已进入第5天，到今晚为止，绝食的学生达3000人以上。
When I was imprisoned in Qinghai, we watched TV from the morning onwards. The prison guards watched it with us because they were worried about the students as well. Even they thought that China was at a turning point in its history.
Huge protests shook major cities in China. Martial law was declared in Beijing, but on Tiananmen Square, the students didn't budge. During the night of June 3rd, 1989, Deng ordered the army to open fire.
On June the 3rd, the army opened fire. That night, I did all I could to save people. I tried in vain to get in touch with the ambassadors of several countries, but I realized that we could only rely on ourselves.
It was terrifying. I closed my eyes. we realized what war was like. We suddenly understood that life was as fragile as a leaf in the air.
When it happened, I was at home. We watched things unfold on the BBC. Their live broadcast made us feel as if we were actually there. It came as a huge shock. I was totally overcome with anger. That's when I started recording my poem, Massacre.
In one night, more than 1,000 dead in Beijing alone. And countless summary executions in the days that followed. Not a single city in China was spared. The following weeks were terrible. At least 10,000 arrests in the capital alone, between 30 and 50,000 across the rest of the country. The so-called legal system that had been laboriously implemented since 1979 imploded. Just like under Mao, security forces took over the country. Liao Yiwu, the author of the poem Massacre, was arrested as well.
They searched me all over. They took off my trousers and all my other clothes. Once I was naked, they forced me to the ground and shaved my head. And then they told me to raise my butt into the air. They stuck some kind of stick in and wiggled it about to make sure I wasn't hiding anything inside.
According to Deng's reforms, a prisoner's detention was highly formalized. It started in the interrogation center, where detainees would stay until they confessed their crimes.
I was interrogated nearly every day. Actually, they knew everything about me, even more than I did, but they had to see their task through to the end, so they kept asking me questions about every little detail.
In the first 2 months, I was interrogated non-stop. It took place on the second floor. Then the interrogation stopped and I stayed locked up all the time. I was terrified. There were always 3 or 4 other prisoners with me. They were there to watch me.
There was also torture carried out by common law prisoners, approved by the prison administration. Its technique was well honed. There was even a handwritten book of recipes called Homemade Dishes.
For example, bear paw with tofu. Sounds delicious, right? But this is what it was. Someone grabbed you from behind, while another guy struck you with the palm of his hand, like this. And usually, once you'd eaten 5 bear paws with tofu, you started spitting blood. You ended up with internal bleeding from the punches. There was also smoked duck. For that, they remove your trousers, and then they struck a match and burned your pubic hair. Once it had caught fire, they rubbed it over your body, which gave off this smell of burning, hence the name smoked duck.
The food was revolting. We only had 2 meals a day. Very poor quality rice and a few leaves of rotten cabbage. It was really tough. Then suddenly, after 1.5 years, they told me I was going to stand trial.
Once a detainee was indicted, he would pass over to the next step. He was transferred from the interrogation center to a detention center to wait to be put on trial.
They told me, as you can't find yourself an attorney, we'll appoint you one. Naturally, this was intentional obstruction on the part of the authorities. My attorney and I never discussed anything, we just quarreled. Because he kept telling me I was guilty, that I was a criminal. I'd say to him, what kind of defense is that? I wanted to get rid of him, but they wouldn't let me.
Once the prisoner was found guilty and sentenced, he went on to the third and final step of his incarceration. He was sent to a camp. He would be locked up inside a factory or a farm, the only purpose of which was to make money. In the early 1990s, there were more than 2,000 of them. This map of the Laogai system was made by Harry Wu. Harry Wu was a former rightist who had spent 19 years in the Laogai. When he came out as part of Deng's liberation campaign, he fled to the United States.
Show your passport.
Carrying an American passport and a small hidden camera, he returned to China for the first time in 1991. At the risk of being caught and imprisoned again, he started filming.
I was in this coal mine for 9 years. I went over there sometime posed as a businessman. I talked to the police manager, say I want to buy products. They're very happy. But he didn't know I have a hidden camera in my bag.
Harry Wu managed to film several camps. This is still the only uncensored footage from inside the Laogai.
We have to find out the production of each camp, the human rights abuse. The world have to know about it.
Until his death in 2016, Harry Wu had been fighting to denounce this system.
During the day, we carried rocks that we loaded onto boats. And in the evening, back in the Laogai camp, we made artificial flowers. We worked at least 14 hours a day, 8 hours in the daytime and 6 hours in the evening. But it could go up to 20 hours of work in 24 hours.
The camps hadn't changed much since Mao's days. At the entrance, a billboard still told prisoners that they were there to be reformed through labor. The labor was still there, very real, but thought reform had lost all its meaning.
They made us read the People's Daily, but I never saw anyone reformed. The prisoners either became worse or they got smarter. They claimed the Laogai was good. Everyone had to speak positively about it to earn a reduced sentence. Yes, thanks to the Laogai, I've become a better person. Yes, Jiang Zemin is a wonderful chairman. He's the most handsome man in the world. It was all blah, blah, blah. We all pretended.
The party was imposing thought reform to the whole country. The new slogan was, "Get rich." That was the best way to divert from any kind of protest against the regime.
The dream of money. All in the money.
You get money or be millionaire very soon.
The government encouraged Western multinationals to invest in China. Every camp director was desperately seeking export contracts, so the names of the camps were removed from the entrances and the word Laogai disappeared from official documents. The practice became so ordinary that a guard filmed with a hidden camera openly admitted it.
I noticed something strange. The artificial flowers were labelled in English, so I realised that they were going to be sent to the United States. I started thinking of ways to alert people to what was going on. The same labels were on flags, soccer balls, and other products. So I secretly wrote a letter and included a few of these labels to denounce the fact that the camps were making goods for export and that the prisoners were being beaten daily.
Chen Pukong managed to smuggle the letter out of the camp. It was sent to the United States, where somehow it made its way to Congress.
At great personal risk, a very courageous prisoner provided this evidence, and his name is Chen Pukong, a young economics professor who is serving time for his pro-democratic activities in China. He sent a compelling appeal for help.
In fact, in a statement to ABC News,
the letter was taken up by the media. Chen Pukong was freed 5 months before his sentence was up. But the business world wasn't impressed. Profit was far more important than human rights. Many products continued to be made by prisoners and sold in the West. From clothes to computers, engines, and even tea. The system had become deep-rooted and extremely profitable. From then on in the camps, everything was for sale.
The whole camp was driven by the economic gains. We were packaging batteries and also making clothing. Some of them were geared for export. Many detainees around me, they cried silently. They dare not to say anything because the monitors are all stationing beside us. They force us to work, and they report it to the policewoman on duty. If you couldn't fulfill your production quota, your sentence would be prolonged. But your family could buy you out. At that time, if you had 10,000 yuan, then you can buy out 1 year of a Laojiao sentence. So the person who came with me, her family paid 30,000 yuan, and she was out.
Business was booming, and China was striving to impose itself on the international markets. In the mid-1990s, in order to join the World Trade Organization, the government decided to change its image and erase the memory of the Tiananmen Square massacre. So they freed a few opponents. But just like in Mao's era, they were kept under surveillance.
The very first day after being freed, there were half a dozen policemen outside my home. They were there all the time, working in shifts. It was another form of prison. The moment I stepped outside, they followed me. Some of them in a car, others on bikes or on foot, to make sure they could follow me whatever the form of transportation I chose. At that time, I used to go to the Friendship Hotel, where there was a nice swimming pool. I signed up for the swimming club, and the policemen also signed up. Whenever I went swimming, I had a cop swimming just behind me.
When Deng Xiaoping died in February 1997, the party had imposed its grip on the country. But the fallout from the Tiananmen Square massacre had sent the country into an unprecedented moral crisis, leading to a rise in mysticism. Qigong, traditional meditative gymnastics, took the country by storm. A Grand Master, a former military officer, Li Hongqi, introduced his own version of the practice. Falun Gong, which draws on Buddhism and Taoism and pseudo-scientific concepts. Falun Gong organizations were founded all over the country with the silent consent of the party. In 1999, the Falun Gong movement had 70 million members, more than the Communist Party's 60 million. In a country where all independent associations were prohibited, it was a massive shock. The party general secretary, Jiang Zemin, decided to act and launched a propaganda campaign to eradicate what he called a sect.
现在播送中华人民共和国民政部关于取缔法轮大法研究会的决定。
自己不信不练法轮功。
各地对法轮功非法出版物及音像制品进行了清理收缴，
送到造纸厂做销毁处理。
坚定共产主义理想信念。
On October 26, 1999, after 10,000 Falun Gong members had organized a demonstration near Tiananmen Square, the party held a meeting at the National People's Congress that labeled Falun Gong a cult. After that, I and a lawyer friend who practiced Falun Gong with me decided to seek justice for our master, Li Hongqi. So a neighbor and I drove over to Tiananmen Square with our case files. Behind us, someone asked, "Are you a Falun Gong practitioner?" Without turning around, I said yes. And then a police wagon pulled up, and we were bundled inside.
The roundup was orchestrated by the 6 to 10 office, a new security agency set up by the party to wipe out Falun Gong.
Police stations were under orders from the 610 office, and neighborhood committees were under orders from the police stations. They told people, whoever you are, if you have information about Falun Gong practitioners, share it with us and you'll get a reward. People didn't give a fig about justice. They only cared about their own measly material interests. So a lot of people denounced Falun Gong practitioners for a jerry can of oil or a sack of flour.
Almost 1 million practitioners were sent to re-education camps. Thought reform was back. On top of long working hours, prisoners had to recant, renounce, atone for, and condemn Falun Gong.
当他们摆脱了李洪志的精神控制之后，精神面貌焕然一新，以积极的态度来对待生活，对政府的挽救充满了感激之情。
In real life, it was a return to the methods of the 1950s, a combination of physical and psychological torture.
They told me I had to change my beliefs. They insulted me and mentally tortured me until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Then I went on hunger strike for 3 days. After 3 days, they said, if you still refuse to eat, we'll force feed you your own shit. From now on, you'll only go to the bathroom once a day. And before going, I had to ask for permission. I had to write the request by hand and give it to the camp director. But whenever I gave the request, the guards would tell me the director was absent. As they wouldn't let me go to the bathroom, I did it in my pants. And then they punished me for making the cells stink.
Were we allowed to read? Of course not. There was nothing to read anyway except the prison rule book. Every night, 4 or 5 people would insult me for being a Falun Gong practitioner. They criticized me and wouldn't let me sleep. The moment my eyes closed, they'd slap me around the head. They'd force my eyes open and slap me. The cell head interrogated me without letting me sleep. When we weren't being insulted, we were made to watch anti-Falun Gong TV programs. Every channel in China was showing them. And we were forced to watch.
The success of what the powers called re-education was staged for the cameras.
我到这儿来了，通过队长的教育，干劲儿的帮助哈，我就当天就改变了。
完了，现在我看对社会上没有什么好处，对我家庭也没有什么好处。
然后他报道新闻。
In front of the cameras, they showed the police guards taking good care of us in order to reform us. But the TV showed only a bunch of lies. The reality was very different. The whole thing was staged.
用事实说话，焦点访谈。
While the government was waging war on Falun Gong, a new era of freedom had opened up in China.
天在睡梦之中晃晃悠悠醒来的我，带上了我的 Walkman 就开始出门奔波，头顶的阳光照得人们暖洋。
Internet was just starting to becoming more and more pervasively used in Chinese society. In 2003, being widely used in discussion groups and blogs. Those unfiltered voices starting to becoming more and more concerned about social issues.
In the winter of 2003, a news item spread over Chinese internet. A young graduate from Hubei province, Sun Zhigong, moved to Canton where he had found a job. He was stopped on the street for an ID check. He didn't have his Hukou, the residency certificate that all Chinese must carry with them at all times. He was taken to a detention center where he was savagely beaten. He lay in agony for 72 hours before dying.
His death triggered, I would say, a first public opinion storm on Chinese internet, focusing on not only his tragic death, but also the systematic reason behind this tragedy, which is the Hukou system, the residential permission for every Chinese citizen has to have, dividing the Chinese citizens into different classes since Mao era.
This problem concerned 200 million migrant workers. They flocked from the countryside to the cities in search of work. Any one of them could have been Sun Zhigong. A group of legal experts launched a petition on internet demanding the closure of the detention centers, where migrant workers without a valid Hukou languished before being sent back home.
A few months later, the State Council abolished detention centers. From a legal point of view, this was huge progress.
The most oppressed seized the opportunity. For years, China had been experiencing a deep social crisis. Corruption at every level only made things worse. Across the country, victims of various forms of injustice who had nothing to lose were demanding compensation.
Petitions are a phenomenon particular to China. Victims of injustice come to Beijing from all across the country. They first petition their hometown authorities, then the provincial authorities, and if they can't solve their problem locally, they come to Beijing. But local officials don't want people going to Beijing to present their petitions. So they have them arrested and summarily detained. The places where they hold petitioners are known as black jails. These places don't necessarily look like jailhouses. They could be apartment blocks or abandoned buildings, sometimes even hotels.
It was the first in the party's history, outsourcing a big chunk of repression to private enterprises.
They're not police officers or bailiffs, but these guys can arrest anyone when they want. There's a lot of mistreatment in these kinds of cases. The petitioners are beaten and deprived of food, and what's more, they have to give money.
Within 10 years, tens of thousands of petitioners from every province passed through the black jails. But they were not the only victims of arbitrary detention.
In 2011, I was arrested at the airport. I was locked up secretly by the authorities for 81 days.
Ai Weiwei is an internationally renowned artist. His blog, dedicated to public investigations into abuses of power and corruption, was one of the most popular in China, too popular for the party.
During my detention, I didn't feel any fear. I found the whole thing strange. Why would the government kidnap someone? They could easily have found an official reason to imprison me. I thought to myself, what happened to my father is now happening to me. 80 years have passed, and now I'm an enemy of the state too.
Despite their best efforts, party leaders were unable to silence civil society. People continued to criticize abuses of power and corruption. The appointment of a man who belonged to the new generation as the new General Secretary of the party gave great hope. Xi Jinping was himself a victim of the Cultural Revolution. It made people believe he would introduce real reforms. Once in power, the new leader took the decision the country had long been waiting for. He launched an anti-corruption campaign. Then he suppressed administrative detention, Laogai, which had been there for almost 60 years. Though very quickly, Xi Jinping turned this anti-corruption campaign into a massive party purge, getting rid of rivals and imposing himself as sole leader. Among its victims, almost 5 million executives and civil servants, including 53 generals and the Army Chief of Staff. The scale and the real purpose of this repression was strangely similar to Mao Zedong's campaigns. Xi Jinping tolerates zero criticism, even when it's only posted on internet. An entire department within the party was set up to censor the internet. Every word published on the web is controlled.
There are 36,000 of expression relating to Xi Jinping alone. Any of those keywords and combinations cannot show up on the Chinese social media.
Xi Jinping has another weapon as well, a very Chinese invention, an army of trolls deployed by the government.
How many of those government internet trolls in China? University alone, over 8 million. In Chinese internet, they are being called 50 cents party. The reason is they were being paid 50 cents per post to dilute the online public opinion, to distract critical voices, also to promote the party lines.
Those who refuse to toe the party line are met with physical violence. On July the 9th, 2015, more than 300 human rights attorneys were rounded up across the country and arrested.
A lot of lawyers were tortured, but the whole country knew nothing about it.
Just like under Mao, they were forced to make self-criticisms. The only difference? 70 years later, it was on primetime TV.
后悔做了这些事情，感到非常的懊悔。这些事情违反了中国的法律，违背了律师的职业操守，扰乱了社会秩序，危害了国家安全，也对家庭造成了负面的影响。对不起父母及妻子儿女。
Some of the attorneys arrested back then are still in prison today. Xi Jinping declared war on the law in China. Since the end of the 1970s, China had started to make judiciary progress, but Xi Jinping wants to destroy it all.
After the attorneys, it was the turn of workers' defense groups, those who dared to organize strikes. They were eliminated.
So-called stability maintenance bureaus were created inside all companies. The Communist Party is supposed to support workers, but instead it represses them even more harshly than in the West in the 19th century.
Then the worst happened. Xi Jinping decided to attack ethnic minorities. The Communist Party had never accepted their cultural or religious demands, their aspirations to self-rule. The Tibetans were the first to pay the price. It was occupied by China in 1951. The 1959 revolt was crushed by Mao's army. 100,000 were killed. 80,000 people followed the Dalai Lama into exile in India. An estimated 500,000 out of 6 million Tibetans died as a result of repression. An estimated 500,000 out of 6 million Tibetans died as a result of repression, famine, and forced displacement.
We are a people that has been colonized by China. Our language and culture are gradually disappearing inside Tibet.
In March 2008, the Tibetans rose up again. Hundreds were killed in Lhasa alone. 4,000 were deported to the Laogai.
Have you any idea what torture is? It's beyond anything you can imagine. Chinese prisons are hell on earth. I was sent to a camp where I was forced to work 15 to 16 hours every day.
6 years after Tibet, it was the turn of the Xinjiang region, Turkic-speaking and Muslim, to be rocked by protests and demands for self-rule. Beijing's response was fast and massive. Now, with Xi Jinping in power, a couple of thousand arrests were not enough. An entire region had to be punished. Repression would be on a scale unseen since the Great Purges of Mao. More than 1 million Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and Kyrgyz were arrested and locked up in so-called vocational training centers.
Inside these camps, the Chinese government carries out brainwashing. They do everything to wipe out our culture and our identity.
And the Xinjiang camp's administration didn't stop there.
Twice a year, they injected us with a product they called anti-flu vaccine. But women's menstruation cycles suddenly stopped, and they became worried about their future. They were hoping to start a family when they got out, and they were scared they might never be able to get pregnant.
The United Nations Human Rights Commission accused China of practicing forced sterilization. Numerous reports denounced the torture of prisoners and forced labor 7 days a week for up to 16 hours a day. Nike, Zara and Uniqlo, among other multinationals, closed their eyes. They continue to benefit from the Laogai system.
Now that I'm in the United States, I tell members of my family to never buy made-in-China products. Not only because they're tainted with blood and manufactured by forced labor, but also because they cost nothing, as the prisoners must work like slaves.
Since 2018, 10% of Xinjiang's Muslim population has been deported to camps. 1 million men, women and children. Repression is such that the prison authorities had to build more than 250 new camps. What's happening in Xinjiang has revived the great fear of all Chinese people. The new monitoring and surveillance technologies that have been deployed there cover now all of China. Deportation to the Laogai once again threatens anyone, anywhere, at any moment.
Wherever you may be, the security agency's IT center in Beijing can locate you within 20 minutes and know which hotel you're staying in, which restaurant you're eating in, and who you're with.
Xi Jinping didn't invent anything. He only modernized the system of total surveillance introduced by Mao. Back then, it was the job of work units and neighborhood committees. Nowadays, it's algorithms and artificial intelligence. The fifth modernization that the first dissidents dreamed of isn't democracy, but 21st century totalitarianism.
Since he's been in power, all the party has done is repress the population. For 70 years, China has seen nothing but persecutions and assassinations. In fact, the Chinese have been so tortured by the party, they finally understood its true nature. But they're scared. As their children must go to school, go to university, and find a job, who dares to speak out? Who will stand up to speak?
They have instilled true fear among the population. Everybody's scared. China seems more and more like a big prison.